Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your speaker for the evening, Dick Morris. Everybody know what that is? Oh, that's Fleetwood Mac. Don't Stop Thinking Tomorrow. About tomorrow, which kind of reflects the title of Dick Morris's book, Take Back America. Please join me in thanking the great Villa Park High School jazz combo, Chuck J. Little mixture there of Fleetwood Mac and Villa Park musicians. Thank you, Chuck. Thanks to all you kids for doing that. You're great. I want to show of hands. How many of you are members of our Associates Club or our President's Council, our Cabinet, our White House Circle? Raise your hands. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. I want every one of you who didn't raise your hand, not right this minute, but when you leave, after you get your book signed, go to the desk in the lobby and fill out one of these applications and become a member. Come help us. Come support us, okay? All of you should have this attractive 4-color brochure, which tells you about some upcoming programs. And those of you who are parents, those of you who are grandparents, I want you to be sure and note this great series of Meet the Presidents. Because in that, throughout the summer, you have a way of entertaining in a fun, educational way your kids and grandchildren. And I'll tell you what we do. It's every week or so, we have a president. We have President Washington, President Lincoln, Jefferson, Truman, Roosevelt. We even have President Nixon done so well by his brother, Ed. Now, these aren't real presidents. I don't want to mislead you. These are, no. In the interest of transparency and to be upfront, I want to tell you, these are historians and educators who come here, and all the kids gather around on the floor while the president talks about highlights of their life and their legacy. The kids get to ask questions, and then the kids get to line up and meet him, just like they do at the White House in the East Room. Then they get to color. They color the birthplaces, they color the family pets, and then the good stuff, punch and cookies. That's probably why they come. But it's free, it's every couple of weeks, and it's all in here, and it's all on our website. So please read it. You have a flyer in your hand for our next big speaker, who is Laura Ingraham. Well, the good news is she's coming July 26th. Further good news, you can buy tickets tonight. All you have to do is fill out that form and hand it in to the gift shop before you leave, and we'll take care of your reservations. The bad news is it'll probably sell out, so please do it now. Tomorrow, I want all of you who has a computer to go turn it on at 10:30 in the morning and watch our webcast from Washington, D.C., where the Nixon Foundation is doing the 5th in its series of Nixon Legacy Forums. We've had 4 of them here. Tomorrow is in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University, and it's about the origins of welfare. And this is a program that your foundation, and it's financed by your memberships, is putting on to remind people of the great work that Richard Nixon did. It's a lot more than Watergate, and we're here to tell you about it. So watch it on, you can watch it on a webcast tomorrow, or you can see it on C-SPAN, because out of the 5 Nixon Legacy Forums we've done this year, 4 of them have been broadcast on C-SPAN. It'll be taped for a later airing, and if you're a member, if you are registered to get our emails, we'll tell you when it's going to air. It's 2 hours long. This is hours and hours of great Nixon legacy programming that C-SPAN has done for us, and we have immense audiences. We also want to tell you finally about our 20th anniversary, which is this year. The Nixon Library and Birthplace opened in July of 1990. We're 20 years old this year, and we have a huge celebration taking place in July, the 16th, 17th, and 18th. You can get a brochure on it in the lobby. These are interesting things, from dinners at Casa Pacifica to elegant dinners here in the East Room, to a morning cruise on Newport Harbor in John Wayne's historic Wild Goose yacht. John Wayne and Richard Nixon were good and close friends. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet some of our board members. I want you to meet Don Bendetti, our former chairman, and his wife Dorothy. Where are you? Don? I want you to meet John Barr. Is Betty here? John and Betty Barr, where are you? Yeah. John is our treasurer. I want you to meet Hubert Perry. Where is Hubert? Where is Hubert? Right there, Hubert. Hubert knew Richard Nixon very well, urged him to run as his father did for office, was a close friend and advisor for years, and he is to us. Thank you, Hubert. Also want you to meet the chairman of the Nixon Foundation, Chris Elfman, with his wife, Linda. And the president of the Nixon Foundation, who worked for President Nixon when he was in the White House. Later, he was appointed by President Nixon to be director of the National Park Service, Ron Walker, and his wife, Ann. And the president's younger brother, who's a look-alike, and he's the one who's going to do the Nixon Legacy Forum, Ed Nixon. We're honored, too, to have our supervisor, Supervisor Campbell. Where are you? There he is. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the third time that Dick Morris has been here. It's not going to be his last, I hope. If I don't talk too long, it won't be his last. And I'm already talking to him about, what are you going to do for your next book? I am urging him to do an autobiography. No one has a better story to tell than this man. The problem, of course, is it'd be about 1,700 pages long. Nobody has more stories, from working with P. Wilson to Trent Lott to, and of course, those great and wonderful years with the Clintons. So let's urge him to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dick Morris.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Especially like those books you have. You know, the legacy of Richard Nixon really has not been explored fully or understood, and it grows really with each year, because we come to appreciate in retrospect the great things that he did that often at the time did not appear to be nearly as important as they do today. What is the most important foreign policy relationship we have in the United States? China. And who started that? Richard Nixon. My own boss was famous because he got paid off by the Chinese government. He used that money to run television ads I wrote. But I didn't know we were ordering out for Chinese food at the time. You look at the oil spill coming up to the United States. The founder of the Environmental Protection Administration and the person who signed the first Clean Air and Clean Water bill was Richard Nixon. One of the three greatest decisions that have ever been made to reduce poverty in the United States, statistically the most important decisions to lower the number of poor people, was made by President Nixon when he created Social Security cost of living adjustments. The Democrats and the Republicans would fight every year over the amount of Social Security that should be paid out. And Nixon said, forget about this. Every year it'll go up automatically as the cost of living goes up. And that eliminated the notion of senior poverty. Now, when I worked for Clinton, I proposed the same thing about the minimum wage, because I said just as the Democrats worked on rounding up a majority of the elderly by being for increasing Social Security, so they play the same game with minimum wage. And Hillary told me, we don't want to do that because we'd lose the issue. So whenever you see them waxing eloquent about these poor people on the minimum wage who haven't gotten a raise, just think about that. I think about that conversation. It's things like that that have endeared me to her over the years. Now, we are at a very difficult moment now in the United States. From the south, we have oil seeping up to our coast. And from the east, we have the Greek crisis, the European financial crisis, coming to our shore. And both of them are going to wreak havoc in the United States. The oil spill, obviously, is going to undo an entire generation of environmental protections. And if only we had a liberal Democratic president, he would take care of that for us, because he would value the environment and he would take steps to protect it. Instead, the minute that oil spill happened, he saw a media opportunity to dump on British Petroleum, as opposed to actually taking any action to deal with it. And when you look at how clueless this guy is at focusing on this, how he seems to have no notion as to what to do, and his hope is that somehow he can evade responsibility for it, it's absolutely revolting. And you put that into perspective next to his crazy insistence on cap and trade legislation, which would put American manufacturing out of business. So here on the one hand, you have this oil spill that's going to destroy the entire southern coastline of the United States. And yet he notionally is clinging to the idea of cap and trade legislation that I think is totally unnecessary. The reason it's unnecessary, by the way, is that we're solving the problem. You'll find that in this book. The United States burnt 6,000 million metric tons of carbon in 2005. And the Kyoto agreements and the Copenhagen agreements commit us to lowering it from 6,000 to 5,000. Well, it's now 5,400. Voluntary measures in the United States. The recession helped, but so did environmental consciousness, has really reduced it to more than half of the goals that he's seeking to obtain through taxes and government regulation. But yet he does nothing when it comes to this oil spill. But the most dangerous thing is what's going on in Europe right now. Because we are watching the United States in 2 years, or 1 year, when we look at what's going on in Greece. The Greeks, you know, are bringing this on themselves because they're totally irresponsible. These crazy, irresponsible Greeks have gotten their budget deficit up to 11% of their economy. Ours is 12. These spendthrifts infested with socialist ideas in the south of Europe, have borrowed so much money that they owe 110% of their GDP. We owe 90. And what you're essentially looking at is the spread of the American financial crisis to the European banks, to a focus on these countries that just borrow so much money. And Obama has put us in that category. Now, France isn't. France is at 6% of their GDP as a deficit, and their debt is about 30% of their GDP. Germany's debt deficit is about 5%, and their debt is 35% of their economy. But Obama has made us into Greece. When he took office, we owed 60% of our GDP as debt, and now it's 90. He literally increased it from 60 to 90 in the 18 months that he's been in office. And the result is that we are now hostage to the international bond community. They will decide whether we live or die. And Moody's, the rating agency, can you believe this, was actually considering, and probably will in the future, lowering the credit rating of the United States of America. We're a quarter of the world's economy. We're the strongest country in the world by far. And yet they're actually considering saying there is a question as to whether U.S. bonds will be repaid and whether debt we incur will ever be repaid. Since Alexander Hamilton assumed the debts of the various states after the Revolutionary War, this credit of the United States has never been questioned, and now all of a sudden it is being questioned. Now, a lot of people talk about socialism. And to me, socialism is not an ideology. It's not even a curse word. It's a statistic. That's all it is, a statistic. What percent of the economy is run by or controlled by the government? And I don't mean indirectly controlled. I mean what percent of the money out there comes from checks signed by the Secretary of the Treasury? And when Obama took office, it was 21% federal. Federal spending was 21% of the economy, and state and local was another 10%. So it came to 31%. When Nixon was president, it was 31%. When Reagan was president, it was 31%. When Bush and Clinton and Bush were president, it was 31%. It has not gone up or down by more than a point since World War II and its immediate aftermath. 31%. It is now 37%. And when health care becomes fully implemented, if we don't repeal it, it's going to be 41%. And 41% is the level in Britain right now. 47% is the level in Germany. 50% is the level in France. 54% is the level in Sweden. That's socialism. And he literally has now increased American spending to that point. Now, let's be clear about what we're talking about. The TARP program, the bailouts, we've gotten all that money back. We lent out $700 billion, and we got $500 billion of it back. The only people that were deadbeats and didn't pay was the government. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and AIG, which is practically the government now, are the only three places that didn't pay it back. Everybody else paid it back on time. But instead of using that money to reduce the budget deficit, Obama shipped it out the door as fast as it came in stimulus spending. And the result has been that we've incurred this gigantic, huge budget deficit. Now, right now, the budget deficit is not as bad as it will be. And let me explain why. I'd like to use my friend Ed Nixon here. He is now head, for the moment, of the Ed Nixon National Bank. And I am the Federal Reserve Board. So I come to Mr. Nixon and I say, Ed, do you have any mortgages that your bank lent or bought that aren't doing any good, that aren't performing, that are with deadbeats and you're not collecting any rent on them and their amortization? You got anything like that? He says, do I have anything like that? I'm wallpapering my damn bank with them. I have all of these mortgages I gave out, and then the ones the government gave out, and I bought them because I thought they were good investments, and everybody told me they were great investments, and Moody's gave them 3 stars, and I bought them, and now they're killing me. They're murdering me. And I say, well, Ed, would you like to sell me $100 million of them? Sell them to you? Yeah. You got a shovel? I'll give you as many as you want, 100 million. And how many pennies on the dollar are you going to give me for this worthless paper? That is, mortgages based on properties that aren't paying a dime. Cents on the dollar, sir? I'll give you 100 cents on the dollar. Well, he calls the local mental health clinic to send me out there. 100 cents on the dollar when this stuff isn't worth the paper it's printed on? But he happily takes the check. And I write him a $100 million check. Now, it's okay, because there's no money in the bank to cover the check. But it won't bounce, because I'm the Federal Reserve Board. And I've just printed $100 million. That's how we print money. We don't print it with a printing press. We print it by writing a check on an account with no money in it that is then honored because it's the Federal Reserve, and we just created $100 million. Now, the United States government has bought $1.4 trillion of mortgage-backed securities, like the 100 million I just bought from Ed. 1.4 trillion, and has created 1.4 trillion of new money by doing it. And as a result, the currency in circulation, M2 in the United States, has gone from 800 billion when Obama took office to over 2 trillion now, because of the transaction I just had with Ed. And in return, the government's holding paper that's absolutely, totally worthless. Now, there's another guy there who's kind of invisible, who's going to sneak up around here behind me, and he's going to come over to Ed, and he's the United States Treasury. And he says, hey, Ed, I'm a little short this month. I got a little bit of a deficit here. Do you think you can lend me $100 million, buddy? And Ed says, 100 million, funny you mention it. Somebody just bought, some maniac just bought $100 million of totally worthless wallpaper from me, and I got this 100 million in cash sitting in my vault. Now, I had planned to give that lady over there a car loan, and that gentleman over there money to start up his business, and this gentleman over here money to develop real estate, and that person over there money to build a new home, and that's what I'd planned to do with that 100 million bucks. Well, I understand those purposes, and the president supports them thoroughly, and we want to encourage you to do it. But we do want to mention to you that if any of those loans go bad, you're fired. Because the Congress just passed a bill last week giving me, Secretary of the Treasury, the power to replace you, fire you, get rid of your board, take over your bank, sell off your shareholder equity, and get rid of the divisions of your bank if we judge you to be in risk of insolvency. So you go and lend the money to all those nice people, but you better damn be sure they pay it back. And just in case you're not quite confident about it, you could give me the money instead. I'm the U.S. government. I'm the Treasury. Now, you know that I'm going to pay you back, and you know that I'll never fire you for lending me money, because I think I'm creditworthy. Well, Ed says, well, how much interest are you going to pay me? And I say 3.5. And Ed says, 3.5? This moron just gave me this money for free. You're going to pay me 3.5 to lend you back the money you just gave me? And I say, yes, sir, I am. And he then goes around to all of you nice people and says, sorry, I can't give you that loan. I have to give the money to the federal government and buy their bonds, because otherwise they'll close me down as too risky. And that's why banks are not making loans in the United States, because the federal government is elbowing them aside at the window and borrowing all the money. But because we're borrowing phony money that we just printed, we only have to pay 3.5% on it. So we owe $12 trillion. Let's see how good you high school kids are at math. $12 trillion, just think 12, times 3.5, 400, right? 4, okay? So $400 billion is all we have to pay for debt service on our $12 trillion of debt at 3.5% interest. Hey, that's easy. Our defense budget is $550, Social Security is $400, Medicare is $300, Medicaid is $200, our total federal budget is $4 trillion. It was $3 trillion when Obama came in, but it gained a little weight. And so 400 isn't that bad. We could do that. But 2 months ago, the Treasury, the Federal Reserve Board, stopped buying mortgage-backed securities. They ended that program because they said we printed enough money, and if we print any more, we're going to be like the Weimar Republic in Germany and have runaway crazy inflation. So we've stopped doing that. So now, when I come to Ed and I ask for $100 million, he hasn't got it. And I now have to borrow real money from real bankers and China and Japan and the United States. And I have to go around and get real money. And to do that, all of a sudden, I'm going to have to pay real interest rates because this isn't money you get for nothing. It's real money. And they're going to charge 7, 8% interest rate. And that's why the interest rate on Treasury bonds rose from 3.5 to over 4 3 weeks ago. Now it's down a bit because everybody's running screaming scared of Europe and they're putting their money here. But in a while, that rate's going to go back up to a normal market rate of 7 or 8%. Now, 8% of 12 is about 1. It's about $1 trillion, a quarter of the budget, a huge amount, twice the defense budget, more than Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid combined, only for debt service, only to pay the cost of borrowing the money that Obama borrowed totally unnecessarily. He borrowed it to spend it to stimulate the economy, and now it's killing the economy. So when you see signs of economic recovery, understand we are recovering from the recession that started under Bush, but we are about to get sick because of the cure to that recession passed by Barack Obama. Now, if this sounds a little familiar to those of you who were here last year, I wrote a book called Catastrophe that predicted all this. And now it's actually, unfortunately, happening. And we talk about a V. You go down and then you go up. Well, I don't think it's a V. I think it's a W. And I think we're about to go way down because of this situation, because of the huge interest burden, because of the European debt crisis, which is all based on this thing of having more money than you possibly can raise and borrowing money you can't possibly repay. Okay, now, let me ask you a question. I told you Obama increased the money supply by 1.4 trillion, right? I told you that he tripled it, okay? Car sales are tripled, right? Home sales are tripled. Consumer goods sales are tripled, right? Right? No? No? Well, where's the money? Where's the money? The answer is nobody's spending it because we're all not crazy. And when we get that check from the federal government, we put it under the mattress, or we pay down our credit card bills, or we pay down our mortgages, or we catch up on our electric bills, or we put it in CDs, even at no interest, just because we don't think there's another check coming and we're worried about losing our jobs. Now, when the economy begins to recover, what's going to happen to that money? Everybody will start spending it at once. And you're going to have the most god-awful inflation you can possibly imagine in this country. But that's not the biggest cause of inflation. That's called demand pull. More people want products than products are being made and services, so prices go up. At least there's a demand. What's going to happen is that the cost is going to push inflation up. There are going to be higher interest rates because I can't borrow from my friend Ed anymore. I'm going to have to pay 7% to borrow from the Chinese, and that's going to mean every business in this country is going to have to pay higher and higher interest rates. And this guy is going to raise taxes only on the rich, but only the rich own businesses. And the result is that he's going to increase the taxes on every employer in the country, and that's going to drive prices up. And on top of that, as the world recovers from its recession, oil prices and energy prices are going to go up. And that's going to force businesses to raise their prices. But they'll raise their prices when nobody can pay the old prices. And you're going to have inflation and unemployment and recession as a vicious cycle, a downward spiral. And that's what we have to look forward to entirely, because this guy spent $800 billion he had no business spending to stimulate the economy. Didn't work. The economy is rebounding because of foreign exports that we're sending, not because of American consumer demand. And when it works, it's going to work all at once and cause this unbelievable inflation. So we're going to get sicker from the cure. This reminds me of the Middle Ages. They used to, some poor son of a gun would get sick and they'd bleed him. They'd say, we got to take out the evil spirits that are causing this guy to get sick. And if we bleed him enough, he'll recover his health. And when the poor son of a gun was dying, we got to bleed him some more, because there is still more evil spirits in there. And that's what Obama's doing with this policy of borrowing and taxing and spending. Now, we are going to win Congress in 2010. Absolutely. And I'll explain how. First of all, conceptually, the one thing America's understood this year is there is no such thing as a conservative Democrat. I know, because I used to be one. Folks, I am extinct. I am a dodo bird. There is no such thing as me anymore. And some people have asked me, how did you become a Republican? And I said, the same way Reagan did. I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me. Because when they need 60 votes, they get 60 votes. And when they need 218, they get 218. And the only difference between a moderate and a liberal in the Democratic Party is how much you have to pay to bribe them to vote for the liberal legislation. So the country has finally learned that if you want a liberal, you vote Democrat, and if you want a conservative, you vote Republican. And this old legacy of, oh, I'm a California Democrat, a Southern Orange County Democrat, with your kind of values, baloney. And even if the guy is pro-life, pro-gun, against gay marriage, against higher taxes, first thing he does when he goes back to Congress is vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. And the first thing she does is name Charlie Rangel, a tax cheat, in charge of our tax policy, Henry Waxman in charge of the environment, Barney Frank, for God's sakes, in charge of our banking system. This guy's qualification is he ran a gay prostitution ring out of his house office. And seven months ago, the cops busted his roommate for having a garden full of marijuana plants. And Barney says he doesn't know what marijuana looks like. And this guy's running our banking system. So that first vote for Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid vitiates, nullifies all of the other votes that the so-called conservative casts. So it's a consumer fraud. It's not a political ideology. Ain't no such thing as a conservative Democrat. And based on that realization, we are going to defeat basically the 50 to 60 Democratic congressmen who come from districts John McCain carried in 2008. Given the kind of campaign McCain ran, can you imagine what it takes to live in a district he carried? I mean, you have to be pretty conservative in that kind of a district. And out of the 270 Democrats in the House of Representatives, 60 of them come from districts McCain carried. Forget districts where it was close or Obama won by only a hair. And we're going to wipe out all of those congressmen. And I think most people understand we are going to win the House. Now, in the Senate, I think we're going to win the Senate too. I think we need 10 seats. 4 of them are kind of given. Delaware, Biden's old seat, heavily Republican candidate, way, way ahead. North Dakota, Dorgan's old seat, the Republicans 40 points ahead. Indiana, Bay's old seat, the Republicans 30 points ahead. And lately in Arkansas, you may think June 8th is your primary day, but to me it's the day of Blanche Lincoln's end of her political career. Because she's going to lose that runoff. And the guy who's going to take her place is 30 points behind, so, behind the Republican. So those 4 are kind of given. Then you have Illinois, where the Democrat is the state treasurer. And he took the job 3 years ago, leaving his family bank that he worked at for 25 years. Last month, the FDIC raided the bank and closed it because they found that it made $30 million in loans to mobsters. And I'm not talking about guys that were posing as something else. I'm talking about guys that were under indictment and said who they were when they borrowed the money. You've heard of the Witness Protection Program. This is the Mobster Protection Program. And unless they replace him on the ticket, he's going to lose, and that's going to be a 5th seat that we're going to pick up. In Colorado, we're ahead. In Nevada, Harry Reid is behind. My wife likes to watch Big Love, and she says that Reid looks like the prophet. She loves Harry. She wrote the chapter on him in our book. You've heard of the bridge to nowhere in Alaska? Well, Reid did a bridge to somewhere, his own property. And he got $18 million in a federal earmark to build a bridge across the state line river between Arizona and Nevada to his own property in Nevada. And as a result, the value of his property rose from $150,000 to $1.7 million. Harry Reid's bridge to somewhere. He's not going to win. So that's going to be 7 seats that we're going to pick up. And then you come to Pennsylvania, where Joe Sestak looked really strong coming out of beating Arlen Specter, and then he announced he wouldn't tell the voters the truth about who offered him a job and who offered him what, and tried to stonewall that for 2 weeks. And I think Mr. Sestak is going to lose, and he's now behind in the polling there, and deserves to be. So that's 8 seats. But we need 10. Now, in Washington State, a guy named Dino Rossi, who was almost elected governor, he was elected governor, but they stole it from him on the 3rd recount by 200 votes, is now ahead of Patty Murray and has gotten into that race. And in Wisconsin, Russ Feingold, the most liberal member of the Senate, has been on a lifelong search for a safe district, and he can't find one except Havana. And now a guy named Ron Johnson has gotten into the race against him, and I think he's got a good shot of beating him. And then there's this Vietnam veteran, I would ask you all to rise, Richard Blumenthal, who never went near the place, who now is ahead by 2 points in that state Senate race in Connecticut. But it all comes down to a lady named Barbara Boxer. Now, Barbara is constantly polling in the mid-40s in vote share, in all the polls, 42, 43, 44. Her highest is 45. Now, sometimes the Republican is ahead, sometimes behind, but she's always under 50. And the undecided vote always goes for the insurgent. Let me put this in personal terms. If they ask your husband, are you going to be married to the same woman next year? And he says, I'm undecided. What are you going to think? It is not good news when the voter says undecided, believe me. But the issue is going to be, who do we run to replace Barbara Boxer? And I'm announcing today, right here, just sent a statement to the media, that I am urging you all to vote for Carly Fiorina in the Senate primary. Now, I like her, and I like her record, and I like her issues positions, but that's not why I'm endorsing her. I'm endorsing her because I believe she can win. The old myth, used to be true actually, that a moderate Republican has a better chance statewide in California than a conservative right-wing Republican, was because voters were voting on social issues, abortion and gun control and gay marriage, and that they shied away from a Republican who had strong views on those issues. But with the economy and the mess that it's in, and the situation we face nationally and internationally, I mean, those issues are important, but are they number one, or two, or three, or four? The most important issues are the economy, and jobs, and the deficit, and inflation. And the moderate and swing voters are not going to be driven to the Democratic Party because they disagree over abortion. They're going to be driven to the Democratic Party if the Republican does not offer a clear contrast on those economic issues which will decide the election. So there's this thing called the No Tax Pledge that a group run by Grover Norquist in Washington formulated. And it basically is like the temperance pledge, only you can drink. And it says that under no circumstance will you raise taxes. And Campbell won't sign it. So I emailed him and I said, Tom, is it true that you won't sign it? And he emailed me back and said, Dick, I've won all kinds of awards as the most conservative congressman, and I'm opposed to Obama's programs and la-di-da, but I don't believe in signing pledges. So I wrote back and I said, if you didn't believe in signing pledges when you were married, your wife would never have tied the knot. I said, sometimes you have to take pledges. And when you're confronted between a choice, I mean, hell, the politicians break their word half the time. Half the marriages end in divorce. But when they come in and they say, I'm not even going to promise no new taxes, what do you think they're going to do? And then there's this law in Arizona that Carly supports and Campbell opposes. Now, that law is the most radical, vicious law I've ever heard. You know what it provides? You know what those maniacs in Arizona did? They made it a crime to do something illegal. That's all the law says. And so I believe that it is very important that we have a Republican candidate for the Senate who offers clear choices on those issues, not a muddled half and half. You know, I used to work for a guy who said it depends on what is. So I don't think that stuff is going to go down too good anymore. And, you know, there's a poll out now that says that Carly would win the primary but would lose to Boxer and Campbell would win. And apart from methodological problems I have with that poll, like that it was taken by the LA Times, there's also the fact that Campbell has run and lost statewide how many times? And if you're going to lose, at least you're going to get some name recognition and familiarity out of it. And that means he would be ahead of a newcomer like Carly. But after a few weeks of campaigning, that will be nullified. And I believe Carly Fiorina can win, and I think it's very important that we nominate her on Tuesday, June 8th. The issue of taxes is going to be the single most important issue of 2011. In fact, it's going to be the only issue of 2011. Because what's going to happen is when Obama took office, his goal was to raise the share of government spending to 40% of our economy, the stats I started with in our talk. And he did. But he didn't raise taxes. He borrowed the money, which meant that he punted over to 2011 how we're going to pay for it. Now, if we raise taxes up to the 40%, we have ratified socialism. But if we lower the spending to 30%, we have repealed the damage of the Obama administration. And if we split the difference, as I suspect guys that won't sign the no tax pledge would do, we're going halfway to socialism, and we're up to 35 or 36%. And that'll ultimately move all the way up. Because what happens when you raise taxes is you screw up the economy and you depress revenues. You get less and less money for the new taxes that you create. There is only one tax that really raises revenue without hurting the economy, that really generates money. And that tax is a tax cut. And you look at the facts. When George Bush cut taxes on the top 1% of the country, they paid $100 billion a year more in taxes than they were before. The percent of the income tax paid by the top 1% rose from 37 to 40 during the 10-year period of the Bush tax cut. Wait a minute, I thought I said he cut taxes. He did. But the cut in taxes stimulated the economy, and it permitted them to increase their contribution to the government. And when I worked for Clinton, I remember that we would sit in the Oval Office working day after day after day on how to balance the budget so we could answer Gingrich and give our balanced budget plan. And the president has a photographic memory. It was incredible. He would know every line in the budget, every dime that was spent, and it was unbelievable to watch this. I might add, by the way, his photographic memory does not extend to his social life. There he is, an amnesiac. In fact, we interrupt this speech for a cute story, a true one. I was a close friend of a woman named Betsy Wright, who was his chief of staff. And Betsy was not the most attractive woman in the world. But her roommate was pretty good looking. And her roommate went over to see Clinton during the 1992 campaign. And Clinton was ranting and raving about what a horrible, phony thing this was. These women I was linked to, I don't know them, I don't do this. I don't even know who these people are. I'm being framed. This is the right-wing conspiracy. Went crazy. And she said to Betsy, you know, I really got the impression he forgot that we slept together. Guy's got a lot on his mind. So anyway, we came up with this whole balanced budget deal. And it said that we'd balance the budget by 2005, 8 years. And then Gingrich said to us, don't do that without cutting the capital gains tax from 28 to 20. And Hillary objected, but Bill went ahead and did it. And we cut the capital gains tax, and we were drowning in revenue. We had more than we could count. Every week we had to put out revised revenue estimates. And because of that tax cut that stimulated the economy and stimulated turnover in the market, and with every turnover we got our 20% as opposed to only occasionally getting our 28, we got more and more money. We balanced that budget in 18 months. It was balanced in 98. You know, people say, how could you be so critical of Obama when you worked for Bill Clinton? Well, we balanced the budget. We eliminated the budget deficit. When we faced a bad economic situation, our solution was to get rid of the deficit and reform welfare and a lot of stuff like that. I would like that Barack Obama would follow some of those policies. It would be nice. So the problem is that in 2011, the left is going to say, raise taxes, we have to eliminate this deficit. And then the establishment opinion leaders are going to come in and say, oh, the left is wrong, we can't raise taxes that much. The right is wrong, we can't cut spending that much. Half and half, half and half. Half spending cuts, half tax increases. That's the phony commission that Obama's set up that's supposed to report after Election Day. That's what they're going to recommend. And that'll increase our government percentage up to 36. And you know darn well that when the economy begins to fall apart because of those tax increases, spending is going to rise because they're entitlements. You can't help it. There'll be more poor people, more welfare, more unemployment insurance, more Medicaid. The downward cycle that works when you cut taxes suddenly becomes an upward spiral in spending, and you can't stop it. And there'll be more and more tax increases. And it won't be half and half. It'll be all tax increases by the time they're finished. And we will have a socialist economy. The key question is, will the Republicans stand firm on a position of no new taxes? That is the key issue we're going to front in 2011. And you talk about the pressures on Greece, we're going to have that. We're going to have the international bond market attacking us. We're going to have the European Central Bank saying we're being irresponsible. You're going to have Moody's saying unless you pass a tax increase, we're going to rate government bonds as junk. You're going to have every economist saying, oh, it's irresponsible what those Republicans are doing. But we will have the majority. And if we stand firm on this, if we stand firm on the no tax position, what's going to happen is that we will propose a budget for no new taxes. Now this time we're going to do it smart. We're not going to include any cuts in Social Security, and we're not going to include any cuts in Medicare. Having just campaigned against Medicare cuts, we can't very well turn around and do them. But we will cut Medicaid, and we will cut all of that crazy discretionary spending that came from the stimulus package and the nonsense that Obama put out there. And we're going to submit a plan to balance the budget with no new taxes. And we're going to pass it. And Obama's going to veto it. And we're going to repass it. And he's going to re-veto it. And you're going to have a government shutdown just like you had in 95 and 96. This time I'll be on your team. And because we will have broken Social Security and Medicare out of that equation, it's going to be a politically very defensible position. Be very simple. Do you want higher taxes or less spending? And the public's 4-1 for less spending. And we'll stand on that line, and we'll fight on that line, as Grant said, if it takes all summer. Even if the government shut down, even if Europe's going crazy, even if we can't sell our bonds, we're not going to give in on that principle. And I got to tell you, I don't think Tom Campbell has the starch for that. But I think Carly Fiorina does. Now, before we take questions, I want to talk a little bit about the state of Israel and what's going on there. First of all, let me start with one fundamental proposition that is so simple it almost doesn't bear saying, but it's something you have to always say when you look at the Middle East. If the Arabs laid down their arms, there would be no war. If the Jews laid down their arms, there would be no more Israel. And no matter how pro-Palestinian you are, you got to accept that. Now, you may think the Palestinians are just in their claims, but it's very clear that all of the impetus for violence comes from one side of this equation. Now, why won't Netanyahu make peace? Why won't he give up land in return for peace? Well, he's a client of mine. And Netanyahu makes the point that I don't have a partner. How am I going to make peace? How can I go to the dance when I don't have a girl to dance with? I'll make peace with the wonderful, benevolent Palestinian Authority. And we'll have a great signing ceremony in the Oval Office, and the handshake that solves the problems of the world, and the lion and the lamb will lie down together, and they'll have an election, and Hamas will win and use the land for rocket launching sites like they did with Gaza, which we gave them 4 years ago. Exact same situation. Now, if the Palestinian Authority had legitimacy with the support of the Palestinian people, and Hamas did not, you could make peace with them. You could cut a deal that would be binding because it would have the political support on the West Bank and in Gaza. But you can't do that now because a majority of the Palestinians want the war to continue. And as long as that is the case, no peace agreement will work. The only thing you can do is stay strong and win the inevitable fighting that is going to result. Now, about the flotilla. Every country has the right to enforce a blockade when it declares it. And I believe Israel had the right to board those boats. And I think the organization that was sponsoring the flotilla, you'll read about this in the next few days, is IHH, an organization in Turkey whose office was raided by the Turkish government in 1999 because of links to al-Qaeda. And they clearly were not the humanitarians they claimed to be. I think they could have done the raid better. I personally would have thought that they could search for contraband and then let the ships go in once they had asserted that there were no guns or weapons or contraband included. But be that as it may, those are all relatively small details. The important point about this is that Israel cannot make peace as long as the Palestinians are not willing to make peace. Now, when Netanyahu hired me, the first thing he said to me, I was prepared to tell him how great I was, and he said, no, I know all that. He said, I want to talk to you because it's 1938. It's 1938. It's 1938. The war starts next year. The camps go into session in 40 and 41. And the Holocaust takes place in 44. It's 1938. And by that he meant the Iranian acquisition of nuclear weapons. Because if there's one point that we've learned over the centuries, is that from Mein Kampf on, when some guy says he's going to wipe out the Jewish population, you gotta believe him. Might be the only thing he says that's credible. But you gotta believe him. You gotta understand that that is fundamentally true. And I believe that because of Bush's failures and Obama's failures, Iran is now on the verge of developing nuclear weapons. And I believe that Israel has no alternative but to attack Iran. Now, what's Obama going to do? He's not going to support Israel. He's going to vote to censure them in the UN. When Israel loses its aircraft trying to bomb those sites, he's not going to replace them. And Israel is just going to have to go it alone. And I hope, and I pray, although it is far too much to hope for, that the 660,000 Jews that live in Southern California get the point. But I don't see any alternative to that. Now, that'll buy us 2 or 3 more years, but while we set the program back. And that's all you need. Because one of the fundamental realities of what's going on in the world today is that oil is on its way out. Look at the electric cars. The Leaf, Nissan is bringing that in. They were going to sell 19,000 of them in 2010. They were all sold already. They haven't brought the first one in. They were all sold with pre-orders. People will be lining up to get electric cars faster than anything else. And the vehicle mileage Americans are driving is dropping by about 4% a year, the first time it's ever dropped. Gasoline consumption is way down. Hybrids are up, and when people start buying electric cars, it's going to completely change the whole mix of the way we get around in driving. And the electric cars, you know, will get 60 to 100 miles for a plug-in. And then after that, you run on a regular gas engine at 20 miles a gallon. But if all you're driving is, 100 miles, to the drugstore and back for you folks, pick up a quart of milk, that'll all be electric. It'll be free. And I think that the revenue from oil and gas is going to decrease dramatically. Gas discoveries in the United States are multiplying. We had a blow with offshore drilling, and I think the lesson has to be to drill onshore with shale and into rock. But in the last analysis, if you're Iran, you're going to be out of business in 3 or 4 years. It is a little-known fact that the second largest export of Iran after energy is rugs. So I really believe that buying 2 to 3 years is terribly important and sets up a very, very important issue for us. Now, if you all like these ideas, please go to dickmorris.com and sign up. Just give me your email address. And I write with my wife a column every day, more or less, maybe one every 2 days. She bugs me one a day. And I only publish like 1/5 of them. And I circulate the others to my list of 500,000 people around the country. And I would dearly love you to be on it. And I will also be in touch with you about what you can do to help win this election. We'll be in touch on a state-by-state basis. So please, when you go home, go to dickmorris.com and sign up. It's completely free. And we'll be together till death do us part. My death, not yours. But I promise in the interim, no Viagra ads. Now, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you to raise your hand, and I'll hand you the microphone so everybody can hear your question. You, sir. Please stand up right into the mic.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Dick, public employee unions, both in California and nationally, do you see the pendulum swinging the other way in terms of the benefits and things of that nature?
Give me the first part of that question again.
Public employee unions?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Thank you.
there's going to be a huge change in the dealings with public employee unions over the course of the next few years, and it's all going to be positive. The first thing that's going to happen is a lot of municipalities, and perhaps some states, including California and New York, may go bankrupt. And when you go bankrupt, the first thing you do is go to bankruptcy court and break all your union contracts. And President Obama is going to want to bail you out because he won't want you to abrogate those contracts. And the Republicans in Congress are going to say, But even before that happens, in education, there is an enormous change coming in this country. 3 years from now, we won't recognize the education system we will have, because the one impediment to education quality that rises above all other impediments is the power of the teachers' union. And we're going to break that power. Right now, there are 6,000 charter schools in the United States. 3% of all children go there. And another 150,000 children go to voucher schools, choice systems, in Arizona and Iowa, where there are statewide systems like that. Inevitably, what's going to happen this year is that the Republicans are going to win a lot of governorships and a lot of state legislative chambers. And then the governors and the state legislatures are going to face this enormous budgetary squeeze with the schools. And the public school unions are going to come to the governor and say, well, I can educate a kid for $10,000 a year. And the charter schools will say, I can do it better for $7,000. And who do you think they're going to give the money to? And therefore, the number of charter schools that's now 3%, I'll bet within a year is upwards of 10, and within 2 or 3 years, I'll bet is upwards of a quarter. And when that happens, the power of the teachers' union has been broken because it rests on a public sector monopoly over the education system. And then I think choice in schools will become the watchword, not socialism, but competition. And I think you're going to see a revolution in education quality.
Dick, thank you very much for being here tonight and enlightening us.
It's fun.
California is in trouble, on the verge of bankruptcy. I think you just said that to us.
I'm the only guy that endorses bankruptcy.
I'd like to know, in light of the bankruptcy issue that looms in front of California, we have an important gubernatorial election. Why won't you endorse or give us your thoughts on that election?
Well, obviously, I want to support the Republican candidate. And I've heard very good things about Whitman, and her opponent is Poizner. But I just don't know enough about it. I haven't followed the race like I have the Senate race. And, you know, my focus here is winning Congress, so I know every congressional district named to God or man. You know, it's so interesting. There are, as I said, about 60 to 70 seats that I think will win in the House, and there could be 20 or 30 more that are in play. Exactly one of those is in the state of California. Out of the 54 congressmen you have, 53 are guaranteed of re-election. And the one that's up is Jerry McInerney from Stockton. I think we can beat him, Democrat. But why? Because the Republicans and the Democrats made the most corrupt deal imaginable in the state of California. I wrote about it in our book, Outrage. They got together and they said after the 2000 census, let's divvy up the congressional districts and put every living Republican in districts represented by Republicans, and every living Democrat, and some dead ones too, in districts represented by Democrats, and let's guarantee that we each get reelected. Let's guarantee that we never lose a seat, either of us, an incumbents deal to take the power out of the hands of the voters and give it to incumbents. And they did that. They went along and they passed it. And as a result, California, literally, at the congressional level, may play no significant role in the Republican takeover of the House. But bear in mind, in American politics, you can lose 4 elections out of 5. But the election in the year that ends in a 0, you got to win, because that's the reapportionment election. Whoever wins that controls how the lines are drawn for the 2010 census. And for the 2012 election and thereafter, those lines follow the way you draw them. And it is absolutely crucial that the Republicans elect members of the state legislature so that we'll be able to influence those lines and have a congressional delegation that represents our state. You can knock off Boxer because they can't gerrymander state lines.
2 quick questions. One, do you think that the BP catastrophe right now that's going on in the Gulf, with now that they announced today the criminal investigation, as well as the Sestak debacle, with now we hear a bunch of some of the conservative commentators coming out talking impeachment and everything, will serve more as a distraction and work against the wave that we got going for us right now versus for us?
Well, I think it'll help us. I think both of those scandals help tremendously. You know, we're so focused on the fact that Obama's a radical and a socialist that we haven't had time to realize he's also an incompetent. I mean, when he can't deal with an oil spill, for God's sakes, and has no solution to the Greek and European crisis at all beyond asking them to spend more money and get deeper into hock, you really are approaching an issue that transcends ideology. And I think that any liberal and moderate Democrat voter looking at his performance in the oil spill has to get more and more down on this guy. all he's done from the start is to demagogue this issue. It's British Petroleum's responsibility. Well, that's okay in the United States senator, but a president has to actually clean the stuff up and have to take decisive leadership and provide the resources necessary to do that, and he obviously has failed to do that. So this is writ much larger than Katrina. First of all, Katrina was a short-term disaster that had lingering effects, but the hurricane passed. This oil spill is going to go on spilling probably for another couple of weeks or months and begin going up the coast and hit the coastlands probably well into the fall. So this is a gift that keeps on giving. An incredibly vivid reminder of the inability of the President of the United States, even when there are no ideological questions, to be able to deal with it. We're dealing with a president who is probably the least competent president we have had since Jimmy Carter.